Hi, and welcome to Paving the Pathway to Publication Beginners course. I am so excited that you are here with me, and we have a ton to cover today. So we're going to just jump right in and get started. So we'll start with just an overview of what this beginner's course will cover. This is just highlighting all of the things that we'll cover over the next 5 sessions. So getting started, what do you need to know to get yourself started in your writing career? What not to do. The what not to do's are just as important as the what to do's. And the what to do's are the essential elements of good writing. How do you write well? There's a lot of those. The importance of getting critiques. What is the big deal with critiques? Why are they so important? How do you get them? What do you do with them? We will talk about all of that. Knowing the business of writing. Even if you don't ever plan on self-publishing, even you're going the traditional publishing route, agent, editor, all of that, there still is business to writing. So we will talk about those things. What are the rules and why do we follow them? So what are the rules of writing in general? What are some specific rules for different genres? We will talk about and cover those rules and why it's a good idea to follow them. Connections, connections, connections. Hopefully you saw the free webinar before purchasing this webinar, this beginner's course, but if you didn't, you will find out that it's so important to make connections with your readers even before you write your first book, connections with other writers, connections with agents, with editors, and just people in the publishing field. We'll talk about how to do that and why it's beneficial. We'll talk about diversifying. So one of the rules that I've heard a lot is pick a genre and stick with it. And if you've seen my books at all, which are all listed on tracywainwright.com, you'll see that I've not done that. However, even though I believe in diversifying your works, if that's what you're called to do, don't overwhelm yourself. And that goes for marketing, promotions, blogging, all of the different things that we talk about. It's good to diversify in your writing and in your marketing and all of those different aspects, but don't overwhelm yourself. And then how do you move from writer to author? How do you get published? So we're going to cover all of that in these 5 one-hour sessions. And so today we're going to start session 1 talking about the basics of good writing. Now, this is a reminder, and I love this quote: "The expert in anything was once a beginner." So when I began writing, I just threw myself into it, and I really didn't know what I didn't know. But I eventually learned all of those tips and tricks and tools of the trade and became an expert. But I was once a beginner. Louie Lamour was once a beginner. J.K. Rowling was once a beginner. John Grisham was once a beginning writer. Mark Twain was once a beginning writer. And so it's good to remember that everyone had a starting point. So don't be afraid of your starting point. Enjoy it and embrace it and let it be your launching point. So, getting started. I talked about this in the free webinar. Everyone has a reason to write, either personal, professional, or if they write for passion. Those can overlap. So, since we've talked about that, we're not going to go into more detail. But my question for you is, why do you want to write? What is the impetus? What is the motivation for you to write? And I would love for you to share that. Shoot me an email at tracy_wainwright@yahoo.com. Or you can leave a comment on my website. But I would just love to know why you want to write. What is it that has brought you to this point? And I would love for you to share that with me. So, I love this quote also. You'll see a lot of quotes and a lot of pictures as we go along, because really, as a writer and a want-to-be author, we're part of this really big community that we may not even realize is out there. And we may see names that we recognize that are like, wow, they felt the same things that I felt at one time. So this is from William Wordsworth, and it's fill your paper with the breathings of your heart. And I think that's what most writers do, no matter whether you're writing for personal reasons, professional reasons, passion, or all of the above. You're really filling paper with the breathings of your heart. So there's so much of you invested in it, and that's a good thing, but it also is part of the challenge of being an author. So, my story. I was not born a writer. I am a math girl. I love math. I've always loved math. Even though I didn't go very far in math, it came pretty easy to me. I didn't go far because I was lazy, but we won't go there right now. But it wasn't natural for me to write. Math's my game. It always has been. So when I started writing, it was kind of a surprise to me. I was in a new, unexpected phase of life. There were all these things that were changing. And I just found that the written word provided this avenue for expressing all these thoughts and feelings that were going through my mind. And so I started just kind of breathing and pouring out my heart on paper. And so over the years, like I said, I started from a novice beginner. I didn't even write really good essays in high school or college, did not like writing papers, did not like research, and now I'm a multi-published author. And so what I'm hoping to share with you is how I came on that journey and give you all of the things that I have learned along the way to help you have a shorter journey. So most people, it takes 6 to 10 years. For me, it did. I'm coming up on 11 years since I first started writing, even just those journal entries and those paragraphs that I thought maybe might become a book one day, just to share with other people. But what I want to do is help cut that time down for you. I don't want it to take you 6 to 10 years. And if it does, that's okay too. But if I can share with you what I've learned in that time and help shorten that, I would love to do that. So I mentioned Louie Lamour. This is one of my parents' favorite authors, and we had tons of his books. He's very well known, and this is a quote that I found from him that I just thought was great. If you're going to be a writer, the first essential is to just write. Do not wait for an idea. Start writing something, and the ideas will come. You have to turn the faucet on before the water starts to flow. And that's so great, because sometimes we wait for inspiration, or we think, oh, I've got to have this, and this in place before I can write it. And that's really not true. And that's kind of how I started, just pouring out on paper, just writing and writing and writing and writing. And eventually, as the water ran, it started to water the fertile ground, and these blossoms and flowers in the form of books and blog posts started appearing in magazine articles. And so just turn the faucet on, just start writing. It's a great place to start. So that is step one of writing, is just to write, and just get it down on paper. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry so much about the grammar. Now, I'm a writer who edits as I go along, but I also come back and edit later. But just try to get down on paper what you have going on. And even if it's scribbles and doodles and brainstorming, that is a great part of writing. So then, of course, the next step to writing, once you've got something down, now whether it's an article, whether it's a chapter in a book, whether it's a blog post, edit it. And yes, please edit blog posts. I actually believe so much in editing that I edit my Facebook posts, and I edit my tweets, and sometimes I even edit text messages. So editing is an important step, because it's very rare that we are going to express ourselves in the best way possible for someone else to understand most accurately the first time we try to express that in words. So editing helps us make sure we're conveying what we want to convey in the best way possible. So after editing, then we revise. And there's kind of a mix match here, kind of they run into each other. But editing sometimes can be more of the grammar stuff, making sure your spelling's right. Revising is going, you know what, I really don't want this character to know this yet, so I'm going to pull that out. Or I've decided I'd rather have this character be 30 instead of 22, or vice versa. So edit for content and grammar, but also be willing to revise and change your characters and add to your characters and add to your plot. There's a reason, and that's so intimidating, and I don't enjoy editing and revising, but it's so necessary. And this picture is just a quintessential picture of an author or somebody trying to put down words on a paper for anything. And that's all the scraps, everything that you've thrown aside because you didn't like it. So don't be afraid to throw things out if they don't work. And don't be afraid of the editing and revising process. It's an important part of the journey. Now, repeat. So there's going to be, especially in the beginning when you're writing, that you will write and you'll edit, you'll revise, and then you go back and you'll write more. You may add in scenes, you may add in paragraphs, or maybe you're adding the next chapter. Maybe you're adding the next book in the series. Maybe you're doing a follow-up article, follow-up book. It really doesn't matter where you're on the process, but you're always going to be on this repeat, on this cycle of writing, editing, revising, repeat. And it really becomes fun and so worth it when you see the end product and you realize that it is the best product that you could put out. So, although you're doing all this editing and revising along the way and you go back through it, there still is another step, even if you've gone through a book 2, 3, 4 times, and that's to polish it. That's to really make sure every comma's in the right place, every period's in the right place, every quotation mark is in the right place, that you don't have your character wearing a blue shirt on page 42 and someone admiring her red shirt on page 46. So this is where you really polish and make it as clean as possible. A lot of times if you're being traditionally published, this is what your editor will help you do. And even if you think you've gotten it perfect, your editor will still help you polish it at the end of the process. Because remember, you want it to be the absolute best that it can be. Now, this is a good reminder because that sounds like a lot of process and a lot of doing and redoing and redoing. Don't give up. The beginning's the hardest, so once you get started, once you get used to the process, it becomes much easier. And like I said, once you see the benefit of going through all of these steps to make your writing really, really good, then you will recognize it's worth it. So just don't give up. In the middle of the process, the beginning of the process, just keep. Okay, so we're going to jump into genres now, and I recommend that you do some research in the genre that you want to write in. You could have been reading it for 20 years, but not realize the different elements that really are supposed to be included according to the publishing world and editors and agents in that specific type of genre. So you see a whole list of genres here, and we're going to go through them and talk about what's required. And all of them, of course, are not included, but you'll see how different they are and why it's important to know your genre. The first genre we're going to start with is inspirational. So this is, of course, in nonfiction. Inspirational would be usually a Christian-based book, sometimes other faith-based books, but basically you want to inspire people. So you want elements of inspiring, encouraging people, helping them move towards a better understanding of themselves, not just as a person, but as a spiritual person. And then, of course, there's self-help, which is trying to help people learn how to do something or become a better person. And that could be in the way of finances, in the way of thinking, in the way of action, career. That's what self-help does. Next, we have motivation. So motivation is a little bit different from inspirational and is a little bit different from self-help. You're really trying to motivate someone usually in a specific area. So it could be in health and wellness. You want to motivate fitness. You want to motivate people in their career. So a little bit different in self-help in that you're not necessarily setting specific goals, but using more stories to motivate people. And then, of course, we have educational and how-to. So you'll see there's some overlap between these different genres under the nonfiction genre. The education focuses more on information, and how to, of course, could be a manual of some type, or how to apply to college, or how to write grants, or how to apply for scholarships, or how to start your own business. So a little bit different. Educational would be giving people that information that they're looking for to make either themselves better or the next career step. More nonfiction, true story or memoir. So a true story could be your story or someone else's story. And then, of course, a memoir is your own story, but written in a way where you're kind of reflecting on it. It's usually not a whole life story, but snapshots, some tragic event that happened or some great event that happened, and you're just trying to capture that to share that with other people. Of course, biography is more of that lifespan covering in a book. And of course, autobiography, just be aware that you can have the most fascinating life story and you want to write your autobiography, but be aware that without a name that's known, the chances of it selling really well is limited. Now, that doesn't say that it can never happen, but think of the books you've heard of or maybe even picked up, and they're usually people that are well known. So biography and true story, memoir, and other types of nonfiction. Of course, then we have cookbooks and travelogues. I still have on my dream list to do a cookbook. My family are big boaters. We've spent a lot of time out on the boat, and I really want to do a boater's cookbook one day, because it's sometimes hard to be creative about what you're going to take out on the boat when you're spending all day. But there are ways to do it. Travelogues. Some people love to travel and share their travels and show those places to other people through books. So there's all sorts of nonfiction books out there. Alright, so general nonfiction rules. And like I said, you can see that there's a little difference in all of the nonfiction genres as we break them down smaller. But the use of stories is almost always helpful, no matter what type of nonfiction you're writing. You can use stories in some way. And what that does is that really engages your reader and gets them emotionally invested in what you have to say. Be honest with your readers. Nonfiction is nonfiction. This is supposed to be truth, whether you're giving education, you're giving a cookbook, you're doing a memoir, you're doing inspirational fiction, nonfiction. It really doesn't matter, but you need to be real and honest with your readers. Don't try to sugarcoat something or skip over something that's hard, because if they pick up on that, they will call you out and you'll have lost your trustworthiness, and you'll have lost any investment that they have in believing what you say. So make sure you're honest with your readers. Match your voice with your genre. So if you're doing inspirational nonfiction and you want to draw people closer to a relationship with God, make sure that you're not joking all of the time. But if you're writing a memoir on someone who was known to be, or that you're funny, or a biography on someone who is known to be funny or just had a good sense of humor, joke throughout the book. So you want to just make sure your voice matches with your genre so it doesn't feel off to your reader. Give your readers something of great value. So of course, when I pick up a cookbook, I want to see recipes that I haven't seen before, that are easy and that are good. It's something that gives me value. When I pick up a biography, I want to read about someone who overcame something, who learned lessons that will benefit me. When I pick up a how-to book, I want to learn how to do something. So make sure you're keeping in mind as you're writing your nonfiction book that your readers are looking for value in that. Employ all the rules of excellent writing. So we're going to be talking about those excellent rules later, but it's just as important in nonfiction to have good grammar, to make sure that you are not talking down to your reader, to make sure that you are using good writing, you're speaking well, you're not adding a bunch of extra words just because. So all of those rules that we'll talk about, you want to employ those in nonfiction as well as fiction. So here's one of them. We don't want to write good, we want to write well. And actually we want to write very well. So just keep that in mind. The goal is not just to write. When we begin, we're just writing. But when we go to publish and we go to give it to other people, we really want it to be something that's written well. So let's jump into our fiction genres. So first we have literary fiction. So literary fiction is its own animal, and it's very different from most other fiction. So literary fiction, here's the rules. We're going to go through them very quickly because we're a third into our hour session today and have a lot to cover. So literary fiction addresses serious topics. So they're addressing something that people really care about. Often it offers intentional social commentary. So social issues are addressed quite often in literary fiction and helping people work through. They often offer political criticism. So even though it's fiction, there's some kind of criticism on a system of politics or a political party. So that's quite often found in literary fiction. They also focus on an issue of the human condition. So maybe poverty, maybe substance abuse, maybe corrupt government. So issues of the human condition. Literary fiction also tends to have more artsy covers. So that may not be something that you would necessarily have control of. Say if you're going traditional publishing route, you would have a cover done for you. But if you want to have literary fiction self-published, remember, tend to have artsy covers and also artsy titles. So they're not going to be quite as straightforward as Henry Finds Love. It's going to be much more artsy. Henry climbed the mountain to discover what was in the clouds. That may not even work well. I'm not an artsy literary fiction person, but you get the idea. It's not as straightforward. Literary fiction, your character is more important than your plot. So your readers are going to be looking for, how is this character developing? What are they learning? How are they growing? They also tend to go more in depth with thoughts and feelings. So while, let's say when we get to suspense, lots of action. Women's fiction, a lot of times, lots of action. But literary fiction is more those thoughts and feelings about what's going on in that plot. Remember, character is more important. Literary fiction, a higher level of writing or use of words is expected. So you want to use those $20 words. You want to use the thesaurus, and you want to use the dictionary, or use words that, you know, might be heard only in a college setting. College professors, not necessarily students. So there's this level. You don't want to write it down to, you know, a 5th grade level, or the way a newspaper that's trying to hit all the masses. There's a higher level, bigger words expected in literary fiction. And there aren't any category rules in literary fiction. You can pick pretty much any theme, any topic, any structure that you want, but you do want to follow the rules that we've mentioned. Okay, so we're going to jump from literary fiction to inspirational fiction. Number one clean number one key for inspirational fiction is clean, clean, clean. And I've actually picked up inspirational books that have had, some have skirted the line and others have crossed the line. And usually what I do is close the book or swipe it away, get rid of it off of my e-reader, or return it to the library. Because if I pick up an inspirational book, I'm looking for something that is clean and safe. The Christian theme cannot outweigh the plot and character. So if you're looking at inspirational fiction and you want to share some great Christian theology or lesson in the book, you can do that, but it has to be discovered through your characters and through your story. It cannot outweigh the plot. Your plot is very important. Your characters are very important. And you need to learn to weave those themes into your story and not have them be overpowering. There's multiple subgenres in inspirational. There's inspirational romance, inspirational mystery, Amish, crossover books that go into the secular realm, as well as inspirational. Those have a little different rules. You've got to be a little bit more careful what you include so that you can really be attractive to readers from different, that are looking for different things. Okay, speaking of romance, so whether you're doing inspirational romance or basic everyday romance that people are used to, there are just certain rules that you need to follow. When you go to a publisher, they will be looking for these key elements. So, number one, the hero and the heroine absolutely, totally, positively, do you like all my use of LL words? Must meet in the first chapter. That is non-negotiable for your traditional romance books. There must be a proposal or wedding at the end. You cannot have a romance book without a happy ending. This is not Gone with the Wind. This is romance that's just purely being written for pleasure. The love story needs to be convincing. So you don't just want to throw two people together and have them not have any connection. You know, when you see a movie and there's two characters and they're supposed to be falling in love and you're going, there is no spark there and this makes no sense. You don't want to do that in a romance book. You want it to be convincing. You want people to go, yes, they belong together. Plot is secondary to love. So falling in love and having that love story is first, and plot kind of gets put in with that and usually interrupts the love story, but it's not primary in romance. You still want strong characters in romance. You don't want them. Now, there are some romance books that probably get written and published, and they just make their characters very two-dimensional, and it works for people who just want to pick up, you know, book after book after book. But if you really want a strong romance book that people are really going to enjoy and remember and recommend, you want to have strong characters. Realistic conflict. So one seminar that I went to by Chip McGregor, I remember one of the things that he said was, don't have an alligator fall in the room. And basically what that means is don't have conflict that happens just because you need conflict. The conflict needs to be realistic. It needs to be like, yeah, that could happen. So whatever comes between your hero and heroine needs to be realistic. Heavy on the dialogue. So where we have lots of thoughts and feelings in literary fiction, romance is heavy on the dialogue. Your characters are going to be speaking to each other a lot. There's not going to be as much action as there is in some other genres. Okay, so romance. That covered it. Now we're going to jump into mystery. Very different from romance. There's some similar elements, but pretty much different. So there's a problem to solve. So right from the beginning, you have a problem to solve. In my novel that is under contract right now, and we're in the editing process, my main character disappears on her way to work. Well, when I originally wrote it, I had a beginning showing her going to work and then seeing the person that kidnapped her. And we ended up taking that out because really a mystery's got to start with the problem. So now the book starts with the husband at the police station banging on the desk going, my wife's missing, she didn't show up for work. So we already have a problem, and that's how you do mysteries. There's some tension that goes along. Mystery's not as high tension as suspense, but there needs to be some tension. You want your reader invested in the problem and finding the solution. More mental action than physical, so there's investigations, there's trying to figure things out, there's looking at suspects, there's looking at clues, there's finding clues, so there's a lot more of that mental action than necessarily physical. I think more of suspense, action thrillers, Jason Bourne absolutely comes to mind. That's more physical action. This is going to be more of that Agatha Christie trying to figure things out. Generally, something has already happened. So like I said, when my book opens, my main character is already missing. So you want whatever that problem is to already have happened when your book opens. You'll have in your mind how it happened, and you may even reveal that to your reader, but you don't start with it happening. Okay, so from mystery to suspense, suspense ramps it up a little bit. There's not just a minor problem, and I wouldn't say a wife being kidnapped is a minor problem, but there's really this major problem. So you're looking at something that affects not just the people involved, but maybe the community or the country, and it's bigger than that. So there's a major problem to solve. Loads of tension. You almost want tension dripping off of every page. Now you want to give your reader a break once in a while, so not absolutely every page, but it has a lot more tension than mystery. Lots of physical action and suspense. You want those people, maybe fighting, maybe car chasing, maybe dodging bullets. So you want to have some action in your suspense. Generally, something is in the works or might happen. So while you already have the problem set out in a mystery, and suspense, you don't necessarily know what the problem is. You may know the problem, or you may just know part of the problem or share that with your reader. But generally, there's different problems or parts of the problems or depths of the problems that are revealed along the way, and you kind of want that feeling where they're on the edge of their seat, not sure what's going to happen next. Okay, so we're going to jump from suspense to fantasy, and I know we're running through these pretty quickly, but because not everybody writes every genre, I just wanted to give an overview, give you some tips and value in knowing your genre better, but we're not going to dwell on any one of them, because if you're not interested in suspense and mystery and inspirational fiction, then you're going to be bored until we get to fantasy, and vice versa. Maybe you're not into fantasy, but we're just going to run through these, so just hang on and know your genres in here if we haven't gotten to it yet. So fantasy, quite often in a medieval setting, so in the past. Magic or other supernatural elements are included. So there's going to be something that people have special abilities, or they can conjure things up, or there's just the supernatural things that happen in your story and affect your story as well. Imaginary creatures, worlds, etc. So this is really wide open for creativity, where you can make any creature you want. My daughter's actually working on, it's not a fantasy, but she has ogres in it, and so she's like, oh, whew, it's just a green ogre, and the other person's like, are you crazy? I guess you're a positive person. Oh no, the red ogres are the dangerous ones. So really, you can just make whatever creature, whatever world you want, and have it be however you want. Other types of beings, so that's creatures, but you also can just have, even completely separate from reality, from the animals that we know of and people. So you can just make any type of being that you want. Science fiction. similar to fantasy, but its own elements. So in contrast, science fiction is set in the future, where fantasy is generally set in the past. Also, science fiction will have technology that hasn't been created yet. So where fantasy has the magical supernatural element, science fiction really relies much more heavily on technology, and you want to create your own technology. This, again, is where you can just go crazy and really being creative. You want elements of science advancement and discovery, so you want people to be able to do things that they currently cannot do. So you want to have, I think of like the Terminator, where, he's from the future and they have all these, technological and scientific advancements that we don't have now. So that'll just give you an idea of kind of the things that you can include in science fiction. And really, like fantasy and the creatures in the world, this really is wide open. You can make any machine do anything that you want it to do because you're creating it. Interesting, maybe even altered characters. So usually science fiction sticks with people and animals, but maybe they've been altered in some way. You want situations to be unique to the future setting. So maybe your plot is specific to something that has happened because of scientific advancement. Also, how science advancements and discoveries affect humans. So it's not just that they affect your plot and they affect your story, but how have they overall affected people? We often see this in science fiction movies, and it's a really essential element to science fiction books. So we're going to take a break here. We've been running through. So this is a quote I found from Jonathan Franzen. It's just a matter of writing the kind of book I enjoy reading. Something better be happening at the beginning and then on every page after, or I get irritated. So remember, when you're talking about genres and looking at genres and investigating them, you want to write what you enjoy reading. And that's genre-wise, but also that it's written well, that you're ready to read and get sucked into the book. And that's what you want to provide for your readers. Okay. Next is young adult, and so you're going to see we're going to kind of go down the age spectrum here. And so young adult has various genres, so you can do mystery, romance, inspirational. There's a lot of different ways to approach young adult books. You want to know your audience. So you will not write a young adult mystery the same way that you write an adult mystery. You want to make sure that you're talking in a voice that your readers can connect with. You want to know their mindset. How do teenagers and young adults think? What are the problems that they face? What are the situations that they live with day in and day out? Know your audience. There needs to be some element of self-discovery and maturing. This part of life, really, people are coming to know themselves, they're coming to know the world, and they're coming to grow up. So you want to have those elements in a young adult novel. Themes that are appropriate for teens. So we won't go into what that means here, just you want to make sure that you're not tackling something that just is inappropriate. So we'll leave it at that. But that doesn't mean that you can't address touchy subjects. There are touchy subjects that young adults deal with in their life. And so you can address those things and include those things in your writing, but just make sure it's done in an appropriate way. Characters need to be in the upper teens or early 20s. So as we go through the books for young adults and children, we really want to keep in mind that they tend to read up in age. So a 14-year-old will be reading most likely about 16, 17-year-old character. 16, 17-year-old will most likely be reading about 18, 19, 20-year-old characters. So you want to have them for young adult books in the upper teens and early. The voice must be younger. They need to sound like they're 18 or 17. Whatever age you have them, they really need to sound that. And get around some teenagers. If you have any in your life, or you can go sit maybe outside a movie theater or somewhere else where teens hang out and just kind of listen to how they talk. That doesn't mean you have to include all the language that they use, but just they express themselves in such a unique way. So that's the voice you want to have in your book. You want to avoid getting preachy with a certain message. That doesn't mean that you can't have your characters learn something important or be exposed to a particular moral or value or ethic. It means that you shouldn't approach it from a preachy, tell you what to do perspective. It really needs to be something that they're exposed to lightly or they discover on themselves. You want positive endings for teens. Teens really have a lot on their plate, and many of them are dealing with tough stuff, and you want to give them hope. And to do that, you want to have those positive endings. So we move from young adult to middle grade, and this really is a genre in books that have kind of developed more over the probably 10 to 15 years, past 10 or 15 years, and really it's those middle grades. So about 5th grade to 8th grade, and they're really not quite young adults, but they're past picture books and chapter books, and so they're that what you think of as middle school. So know that audience. They also talk differently than adults and even young adults. So know your audience. Use an age-appropriate voice. Make sure that they're going to be able to connect with your characters. Parents are generally peripheral. This is somewhat true in young adult novels as well, but they have more of a place in a young adult novel. In middle grade, they're really kind of not quite a part of the story. They can be there, of course, they can influence, of course, but really you're focusing on your younger characters. Dialogue is an absolute must. So to hold your reader's attention, you're going to want your characters talking to each other a lot, because middle grade age children like to talk. Think of those tweens. They are talking to each other all the time. It's the quintessential age when, they're on the phone all the time. Of course, now there's a lot of more texting all the time, but they're communicating a lot, so you want to include that in a middle grade book. A conflict is essential. You've got to have something going wrong. Now, this is really true in any book, but you want to make sure that you have that conflict going on for your middle grade reader. They have a lot of things pulling their attention, and if you are not holding their attention, there's so many things to distract them. So you want to hold their attention with some conflict. The main character is key. The main character needs to be a doer, but also a thinker. So someone who thinks a lot about something, but then takes action on it. You don't want a character that just thinks and thinks and thinks and never does anything. And you don't really want a character that just kind of goes off and does their own thing and never talks about why. So you want a strong main character that is thoughtful and does. So, chapter books is next. So we're moving down that scale, like I said. So, lower middle grade. This is, chapter books can be anywhere from 1st, 2nd grade to probably 3rd, 4th grade. So, and it really depends on the reader. There are some, even my older kids sometimes will read a chapter book just because they enjoy the story. So, but chapter books are really for those elementary grade levels. Often include illustrations. There's many chapter books that don't, but even just if it's a small illustration at the beginning of the chapter, sometimes there's even more than that. That's not something necessarily you need to worry about. If you want to do a chapter book, publishers have their own illustrators. So don't feel like you have to be an artist or come up with illustrations if you want to tackle a chapter book. The story is revealed in episodes, so each chapter is almost its own little story within the story. And so they can read that first chapter, and if they didn't read any of the rest of the book, they would have this little complete story. But of course, you're going to make your characters so engaging and so much fun, they're absolutely going to have to go to that next chapter. But it's not a continuous problem throughout all the chapters. It's like each little segment has its own problem they have to solve or thing that they have to get through. There's a few characters in chapter books. You want to keep it pretty basic and simple. There's a short time span, so you don't want to cover a year in a chapter book. You want to cover maybe a week or even a day, possibly a little bit longer than that, but you want to keep the time span short. And you want the plots to be uncomplicated. So whether you have one plot or multiple plots in the different chapters, you really want it to be simple, that something a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old can understand easily. Alright, so then we come to picture books, and it's so funny. We were just talking about picture books the other day, and I have a friend who's a first grade teacher, and she said that's one of the best parts of being a first grade teacher is I get to read picture books all the time. And I've done a couple of picture books, and it took a lot of research to really figure out how to do it well. I will tell you that in the world of publishing, picture books is one of the hardest to get traditionally published. It really takes a lot of effort in getting into that world. But these are the rules that you're going to need to know if you want to tackle a picture book. They are generally 24 to 36 pages, and almost always 24 or 36. There's not very many that fall in between that range. They rely heavily on illustrations. So, of course, a picture book has an illustration on every page, and then maybe a sentence or two per illustration. They're very light on words. You talk about wanting to convey a message in the least amount of words possible. That is definitely what we're talking about with a picture book. Under 1,000 words, possibly under 500 words. And you want them to be quality. You don't want to waste any words when you're that limited. Read aloud friendly. One of the things that I learned is when you have a picture book, read it aloud. Find a child to read it aloud to, or just read it aloud to yourself, because you'll catch those things that are hard to read. You want to avoid preaching. You don't want to, say, hey, 6-year-old, eat your vegetables. But you can tell them through a story that it's important to eat their vegetables because it makes them healthy. Another quote from Anne Lamott. So we've gone through all our genres. So this is a good place to remind you, don't want you to get overwhelmed, that almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. You need to start somewhere. So even if you're getting all of these elements, or maybe you've already written your book and you're like, I don't have these elements in my book, I'm going to have to go change them. That's okay. All good writing begins with terrible first efforts, and that's okay. So now we're going to go to setting goals. We've gone through a lot of informational genres. So we're going to talk about, okay, now that we have that base, let's set some goals. Decide what you want to write. So what genre do you want to write? And then, what specifically? So what topic, what character, what problem? Decide what you want to write. Get started. Remember, write. You just got to start pouring those words out on paper. So as soon as you decide what you want to write, don't delay. Don't think about it. Don't mull over it. Don't wonder if you've picked the right thing to write about. Just get started. Do your research. So we've talked about a lot of the genre rules, but make sure you know what you're writing. So do your research. Make sure you have your characters and your plot and your maybe careers that you're including. It depends on the type of genre, what type of research you'll need to do, or even how much you'll need to do. It could be very little. But think about what research you need to do as you're writing to make sure that you have everything you need to meet at the end, that completed part of writing. Write. Just keep writing, researching, writing, editing, writing. Keep writing. Brainstorm. So everyone gets writer's block. Everyone stares at the blinker, the blank page. You kind of get stuck and just don't know where to go. Brainstorm. Get a piece of paper out and some markers or some colored pencils and just start writing down words. Writing down plot ideas, character ideas, and just write it out and just be creative, and you'll be amazed what you will spark your brain to come up with. Keep notes. So this is one thing I have learned, and maybe it's just me, I'm forgetful, but I often am writing 2, 3, 4 books at a time, and so I will go back to a book and I'm like, okay, so what was that character's last name, and what was her sister's name, and how old was her sister? So I keep very meticulous notes, and I've heard of some authors of some of these big novels that just have hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes. And you may or not need that many, but just keep notes to help you remember your characters, your plots, your locations, your timings, so that you don't end up with something completely different. I actually do a column, a fiction column for a magazine, and discovered as I was going through my past articles that I changed a character's name on like one of the installments of the story. And so I started my notes. I'm like, even doing this, I've got to have my notes. So it will keep you on track. Outline. Not everybody outlines. I don't always outline. Sometimes I do. Some books I want to know, boom, 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 boom. Here's my beginning, here's my middle, here's my end. This is what's going to happen. I outline it. I fill it in. Other books, I just write and just keep writing them. So figure out for you whether outlining is helpful or a hindrance. And if it's helpful, use it. Decide how often you want to write. Do you want to write an hour a day? Do you want to write 5 hours a day? Do you want to write 15 minutes a day? Do you want to write twice a week? Decide how often you want to write and what fits in with your schedule. And then write that down somewhere and put it where you can see it regularly to keep yourself motivated. Because even if you're writing for passion, and even if you're writing just because you have this desire to do it, it's still work. And sometimes you're going to have to plant yourself in that chair and get your laptop out or your pen and paper, if that's the way you write, and just do it. So decide how often you want to write and write that down. Decide how many words you write. Sometimes I will have a word goal. So I want to write 10,000 words this week, or I want to write 80,000 words this month. So decide how many words you want to write. Maybe you're not good at keeping the clock. Maybe you only have bits of time here and there, and you're just getting it in when you can. And so you just want to reach, 2,000 words today or 10,000 words this week. So that's another good way of setting goals for writing. Decide how many chapters you want to write. Maybe you don't want to have a word count. Maybe you're just not sure how many words you need or how many words you're capable of doing. But maybe you want to write a chapter a day. Maybe you want to write 5 chapters a week. So that's another way of setting goals to just keep yourself on track. Set a definite time frame. Now remember, goal setting is to help you take step by step by step to the end of your book. Getting your blog set up, or whatever your writing goals are. Usually here it's going to be a book. But set a definite time frame. Give yourself a deadline, because for whatever reason, even when we set deadlines for ourselves, there seems to be something about getting ourselves to sit down and do it and get motivated that a deadline provides. Celebrate your small accomplishments. So when you've reached that 2,000 words, celebrate it. Share with somebody. Get yourself a bowl of ice cream. Give yourself a pedicure. Whatever you want to do to celebrate. Celebrate those small accomplishments, because they're the steps that get you to the end goal. Don't focus on the big picture too much. Don't focus, for instance, if you're writing a fantasy novel, they're going to want 210,000 words. Fantasy novels are really, really long. Historical novels tend to be really, really long. Don't focus on that big picture as much as taking those small steps towards your goal. You'll get there. Perseverance is key. It's absolutely, if you give up, who knows how many people have partially written books in file folders, whether on the computer or in an actual filing cabinet, that have never been finished because they cannot get through the work or they cannot get through the rejections. So remind yourself that you're doing this for a purpose, and even though it's work and even though sometimes it's hard, the end result will be very, very well worth it. This quote I found from Octavia Butler. You don't start out writing good stuff. You start out writing crap and thinking it's good stuff. I can relate to that completely. And then you gradually get better at it. That's why I say one of the most valuable traits is persistence. So remember, no matter where you are today, you're probably not where you want to be. But next week, next month, next year, you will have grown in your writing. And you still may not quite be where you want to be, but you're not going to be where you are today because you're going to keep going and you're going to keep getting better. So, getting feedback. We're coming super close to our hour, and so we're just going to keep running through. But let me just remind you, if you have any questions or want to know more information about something, shoot me an email, Tracy_Wainwright@yahoo.com. So we're going to keep running, but please feel free to send me questions or leave a comment. So, getting feedback is very important because other writers will be able to share with you what you don't see in your own writing or what you don't know yet. So you can join writers groups, and that can be online writers groups or local writers groups. They're really generally very generous and really kind, for the most part, in giving feedback in constructive ways. So like I said, that can be online or in person. Just do a search and see what you can find. Get a professional critique. You can pay for people to critique your first couple pages or first chapter. It's usually pretty expensive. That's one of the reasons I've included a 2-page critique in this course, is because there's nothing quite like having someone else go through your manuscript word for word and giving you that feedback to say, you know, this would be a better word, or you may want to switch this up, or this doesn't work, or this is weak and you want to make it stronger. So there's a lot to be said for getting a professional critique. Submit your work to contests. This is a great, cheap, or inexpensive way to get feedback. When you submit your work to contests, usually it's a chapter, or the first 2 or 3 chapters. And while they are looking at your work for the contest, they also offer you feedback. So there's lots of different writers' organizations that have contests that run all throughout the year. So getting feedback, I'll just let you read this for yourself. One of the things you don't want to do is write and blurt it out on the paper and just hand it to somebody for feedback. Now, in the very beginning, I just didn't know any better. I didn't know what I was missing. But really, you want to go through that editing and revising process once or twice yourself, so that you can catch all of the small things and change things that you wouldn't have noticed when you were first writing it, so that it at least is a little bit better before you hand it to somebody for feedback. Accepting feedback. This is the hard thing, and I always tell people I'm so used to red ink on my stuff, whether it be a speech or a book, and of course it's gotten less over time, but how do you accept feedback when you've poured your heart out on the paper and you come back and somebody's ripping it? And they don't really mean to do that. The first key is to remember that we always have something to learn. So you have something to learn. That doesn't mean you have to accept every comment and suggestion that someone gives you, but there's something to learn all the time. Critiques take okay to good, good to better, and better to great. So the reason writers do critiques for each other is really help to boost each other up and support them and help hone the craft. And so that's really, remember that when people are giving you feedback, their goal is to help make your writing better. You want to detach your emotions, and this is hard when you've kind of bled all over the paper and writing, especially if it's a very personal writing. But you've got to remember that even when something's very personal, there's a certain way to communicate it that people will connect with better. So try to detach your emotions. Sometimes put that critique away for a day or two or a week or two, and then go back and look at it, and then you can go through it. Make it a learning opportunity. go, okay, what is it I can learn from this? Take what's useful and ignore the rest. I do not take every comment and suggestion that I get when I'm accepting feedback. I evaluate it based on, will this make my writing, my story, my character better? And if it will, I change it. If it won't, I leave it the way that I had it. And sometimes people will make comments based on information they don't have about your character or plot that will come out later. And so keep that in mind, that they just don't have all the information yet. Don't let it steal your voice. So while you're changing things based on other people's recommendations, sometimes their voice gets in the way on how something is said or how something is done. And you don't want to let that steal your voice. So just make sure you're still writing it in the way that you love to write. All right, so critiques are reciprocal. So when someone else is critiquing your work, unless you're doing a paid professional critique, you are also going to critique their work or somebody else's work. Just because you're beginning does not mean you don't have anything of value. You probably already know more than you realize you know, because you can probably recognize good writing and what could be changed to make something better. Also, you're going to learn as you go. It's okay. You'll see what other people pick up on and comment on, and you'll start looking for those things. You'll actually find that you can't miss those things at some point. It's easier to see things in others' work, so what you might have missed in your own work, you're going to be able to see in somebody else's. It takes the emotional attachment out. These are not your words, they're not your characters, it's not your plot, it's not something you're emotionally attached to. And so you're going to be able to look at it from an outsider's perspective that's going to be helpful to that other writer. So when you're giving feedback, number one, don't wait. Don't wait till you feel like you've got this writing thing down. Go ahead. It's a good part of the process. Share what you know. You already know stuff, and like I said, you probably didn't even realize you know it. So share that with the other writer. Be gentle. Remember that they have poured their heart out on this paper, and they are very emotionally attached. So just make sure you're gentle in your comments and your critiques of another writer's work. Tag. This is something that I found that is a good policy when you're critiquing somebody else's work. So you want to tell the writer something you like. Always start with positive. Ask the writer a question. So if you're not sure about something or you think something could be done differently, form your comment in a question and then give the writer a positive suggestion. I try when I can to say, what about wording it this way? Or maybe you could try this. So try a positive suggestion. So keep it positive. That doesn't mean you can't still say, I don't think this works. It just says you do it in a positive way. So, the importance of making connections. We are at our hour here, but there's just so much to cover in these 5 sessions. So this one's going to go over just a little bit. Pause it if you want. Remember, you have access to this to replay and start in the middle and watch it whenever you want. So we've hit our hour, but we're going to keep going because I just don't want you to miss out on anything, and I want to share all this valuable information with you. So if you have to pause and come back later, that's fine, but make sure you come back. So we're going to dive into the importance of making connections. So the importance of making connections is getting in that writer's world. It will be inspirational to you. It will be adding to your knowledge, and it will just help you form those relationships with people in the writing world. So conferences, seminars, and workshops are great ways to make connections. Writers groups, you can join them online or in person, and that's not just for critiques. That's also for asking questions, for going, hey, I'm not sure about this type of gun. Could you help me out with this? Or, my character is going on a trip to Arizona. I've never been to Arizona. This is what I've heard. Will this work for my book? So it's good for asking advice and just connecting with other writers. Social media, great way through Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, writers' quotes, writers' groups where you share information. Great resources for making connections. this is what making connections look like. So you're in the middle, and then you have your workshops and seminars in the tan, we'll call that, and then you have your social media in the blue, and then you have your writers groups in the green, and then you have your let's say your local writers group in the purple. And so each connection you make is going to have these other connections, so that you're going to create this writing world where you have all these resources and relationships at the tip of your fingers, so that you can become the best writer that you can be. So we are coming to the end. We're not going to go that far over, so we're just going to look quickly at what we've learned and what we have in the next 4 sessions. So what we've learned, we've talked about getting started. What do you need to just get going, get something down on paper? Genre research. We've talked about general rules for a variety of genres. We certainly didn't cover them all, but the importance of knowing the rules in whatever genre you're writing in. Setting goals. I believe setting goals is very important, because it gives you something to reach for, and it gives you a chance to set the bar where you can set it and reach it, and it helps motivate you. We've talked about, setting goals is on there twice, look at that. See, sometimes even I have typos that still make it in there. Getting feedback, how important that is. It really is. You can learn so much from other writers and what they pick up on your writing, and even giving that feedback and looking at the way other people write. You'll start to see things in your own writing when you are doing critiques on other people's work. It will open your eyes. One drawback is I can no longer read books that aren't written well, because I'm too distracted critiquing them all along the way. But feedback is really not just your own editing and revising, but it just helps you learn from people that have been writing longer and see things differently. They're going to read it like a reader, and so that will give you a glimpse of how your reader will perceive your writing. And of course, making corrections. We went through that very quickly because we covered that in the free webinar. And so if you want more making connections, and you've gotten this beginner's course without seeing the free writing webinar from writer to author, just shoot me an email and I'll give you that link so you can learn more about making connections and how to do that and why that's important. Okay, so what's to come? There's 4 more sessions, and yes, each one of them is this packed. So if you have to watch them 20 minutes at a time and take notes, I understand. It's a lot of information. But remember, what I'm giving you is what I've learned over 10 years of writing. And I won't say everything I've learned, because I have other courses that I'm working on. But for a beginning writer, probably what I learned in 5 years, I'm compacting into 5 one-hour sessions. Because remember, I'm going to help you zoom up that escalator. So we're going to turn that baby on so you can get to the top quicker. So, Session 2, Elements of Good Writing. I know you can't wait for that. We covered some in the free writing webinar, but there's so many more elements of excellent writing to come. Session 3, Knowing the Rules. What are the rules in writing, in publishing, in submitting? We're going to talk about all of that. Session 4, Making Strong Connections. So we highlighted those connections today, but we're really going to talk about how do you make strong connections, relationships with people in the writing world that will benefit you, not just professionally, but personally, and the ultimate building your platform. So, especially in nonfiction, you'll hear this a lot, but even in fiction today, and editors and publishing houses do not do as much marketing as they once did. And so really, as an author, you need to start building your platform pretty much from day one, and we're going to talk about how to do that in Session 4. Session 5, moving to the next level. So we're going to wrap it all up and look at what you can do to become published. I'm going to give you everything that I can to help you really be prepared to have your work ready for publication as much as I can in 5 hours of teaching. So you do have some homework before you go away. What I would like you to do is set some goals. You can set 1 goal, 2 goals, 3 goals. Set some goals. So how many words you want to write, how many chapters you want to write, how many books you want to write, what you want to accomplish this year in your writing, what you want to accomplish this month in your writing. Set some goals. I would love to see them. Please email me. And then by the time next week comes, if you're watching this when this first came out, try to check off at least 3 mini goals this week. So say you want to write a chapter a day, and you accomplish that 3 days. That's 3 mini goals to me. If you want to write 2,000 words each day, and you check that off 3 days, then you've met a goal. If you want to read a writer's blog, or you want to join writers groups on Facebook, those count as goals. And then celebrate that progress. Give yourself a treat. Do something special. It doesn't have to be big, but just celebrate your progress. And don't forget to email me your 2 pages to critique if those pages are ready. So look over them one more time. Make sure all your periods and commas and quotation marks are in the right place. The things about your genre, make sure that they're in there even in the first 2 pages. You're not going to, of course, be able to put all elements. So just go over it one more time, and if it's ready, go ahead and email me. Remember, you have the full 5 weeks to send that to me. So we're going to finish up with this quote. "You only learn to be a better writer by actually writing," by Doris Lessing. And we've kind of hit that concept today over and over and over again. But it's so true. So I'm glad you're here with me. I can't wait to see what you're working on. I look forward to hearing your comments and questions. And I guess I will see you next time for session 2 of Paving the Pathway to Publication Beginner's Course.